Hello and welcome to the video. This is my review and overview of the RunCam Thumb 2, which is this thing here. Now this has been out quite a few weeks now. The reason that I have waited to make a review video is that there is a new version of firmware. So this is running the latest version 1.1 of the firmware, and it was shipped to reviewers with the initial version 1.0 version of the firmware on it. I personally don't think it's fair to review a product with an intermediate firmware revision, particularly if I know that there's one that's about to come out, which is the one that you'll get if you buy it as a customer. I don't think there's any point in reviewing a product with a beta version of firmware when I know there's an update coming. So this is all with the version of the firmware that you'll get if you buy one of these things. Now, I am a fan of the RunCam Thumb series of cameras. I guess you could say that this is the third version. They have the very first version, which they've kind of renamed now. We also then had the next version of it, the RunCam Thumb Pro, which has available in lots of different versions, including 4K. And then we have this one. So you could argue that this is actually the RunCam Thumb 3, but actually, with the rebranding, it kind of makes it the RunCam Thumb 2. Again, no internal battery in here. The lens cover is removable and you can buy it with and without ND filters depending on the cost. It's a little bit bigger, it's a little bit heavier than the ones that have been kicking around before, but there are a number of distinct improvements with this over the previous version for those that want to capture footage. Again, we have gyro flow support in here, SD card here at the bottom, but we also have the power at the back. Again, only 5 volts this time, so be very careful that you only power it from a 5-volt supply. But we have a USB-C at the port at the end, which makes it very handy to use connected to something like a power bank. Specs on this will go up to 4K 60 frames a second. Sadly, 60 frames a second at 4K is the highest frame rate. It would have been nice to have a 120. We're 2.7K at 60 frames a second, and nice clear recording. I'll show you what it actually looks like in a moment. Built-in gyro for gyro flow support. Again, gyro flow and the RunCam guys seem to work quite closely together. Again, a little bit heavier than before. Gorilla Glass lens, so this hopefully will take a bit of a knock. I really like these lenses because it does mean that if you are unlucky enough to strike the lens or get a crack or scratch in it, it's relatively easy to swap it out and also change ND filters on a bright day. Vertical and horizontal recording on this. Sadly, the vertical recording gives you that kind of portrait style, so it doesn't kind of rotate the whole image around, but you can set that in the settings. Remote control via a flight controller, as with all of the other versions, and settings are all changed by the QR codes. So this again is the RunCam Thumb 2. Center in here is an IMX586, that's 4800 megapixels. Resolution is 4K, 2.7K, 1440 and 1080. Video format is saved in MP4, gyros built in, Type-C connection at the end. Micro SD card capacity is maximum of 512 gigabytes. Input power is only 5 volt. Remote control is now via the PWM or a UART. Power consumption's gone up a little bit on this as well. It's 700 milliamps at 5 volts. That's a little bit more than the previous version. Dimensions on this are 26 by 27.5 by 55 millimeters. So a little bit chunkier than the previous one. And the net weight has gone up to 27 grams. Again, increase. So what are the changes from the previous version? Let's talk about that before we get into some footage. Well, the big difference is the IMX586 sensor. It was the IMX577 in the previous version, so it's a much more modern sensor. Increase in that power. Again, this is a 700 milliamp needed rather than 500 milliamp. So if you're going to try and run it from the 5 volts output from your flight controller, just be careful of that. Dropping this in might push it over the edge. Change in USB-C for the cable, and that it also gives you video out as well as control. So those 2 cables in the box are going to come in very handy. Maximum storage increased from 256 gig on the previous model to 512 gig now, so tons of room. And there's more frame rates in the 1080p mode, and of course it is larger and heavier. It's 11 grams heavier than the previous version, so be aware of that if you're putting it on something that's very sensitive to central gravity. Now I have updated this one, as I said, to version 1.1 of the firmware. Pretty easy to do that. You just download and stick it onto the SD card, power the unit, and you don't have to do anything. It'll just go through it. Although it says it'll take 2 or 3 minutes on the website, mine took about 10 seconds with the LED at the end flashing green and red, and then it was all updated. In terms of the changing of the setting, once it's powered, then you just press and hold the button, which is actually integrated into it at the front. It's kind of around where the LED is. Press and hold that. That will then go from the standard red to a green color. Then you can get the app open on the phone, change the settings that you're interested in, and then show the QR code that's generated to the camera, and then that is the changes set. All of the settings that you're going to need are on the app, so if you're interested in what's available, you can just download the RunCam app from the App Store of whichever system you have, Android or Apple, and then you can go in and have a look and have a play, because it doesn't have to be connected. This is all very simple stuff. So this is 1080p, 60 frames a second, unstabilized raw footage from the camera. I have got the NDL or ND8 even filter on the front, which helps a little bit with the contrast. I wouldn't recommend using these without an ND filter. I think it just looks so much nicer. Hopefully you can see here what it looks like and also get an idea of the quality of the audio. Now let's go up to the bridge, and what I'll do is I will take some footage of different resolutions and we'll zoom in and we'll see how well they work. But the thing I'm really interested in is, do we actually get any more information when we bump up the resolution? With lots of other cameras that I've looked at historically, things like the Hawkeye and others, this is where everything comes really unstuck. So we have 1080p, 2.7K, and at the bottom we have a 4K image. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom into the same part in each of these, and let's see if we actually get any more pixels when we're bumping stuff up. So 1080p, that's going to be the one we're going to measure everything against. That is the house in the very far distance at the end of the canal, and that's what it looks like. Do we get anything when we go to 2.7K? Let's zoom in and see. Now some of the cheaper cameras will get the same image, and you can definitely see we definitely have more clarity here in the 2.7K image. We're definitely getting more pixels and more clarity. But in 4K, let's see what this looks like, because this is where lots of cameras come unstuck. You can definitely see at 4K there is a marked difference, not only between the 1080p and the 4K image, but also between the 2.7K and the 4K image. There is a lot more clarity and a lot more information in each of the individual frames. This is really impressive. Lots of cameras in this price range that claim to be 4K fall foul of this, and if we're lucky, we get 2.7K upscale to 4K. In the worst cases, we get 1080p upscale to 4K. But this genuinely looks good, and maybe that's a fact that we now have this new IMX586 sensor that's doing the job for us. Would it stack up against a 4K image from a GoPro? No, probably not. But it's definitely worthwhile increasing the resolution on this little camera. You actually get something back for the increased file size. So putting them side by side like this with that zoom in, you can see that on the overall image, you're not really seeing that much difference. The color contrast is pretty good in all of the different modes. The saturation is really nice. It's not oversaturating like RunCams used to. And the sky is getting exposed reasonably well too. Now you can change things like the exposure, but I would say that this is generally a nice set. I'm just genuinely surprised that 4K mode is actually giving us a significant improvement in the amount of data that we've got out there in the image. So well done, RunCam. This is the first time I've tested a camera under about 150, 200 pounds where it's actually had this appreciable a difference. Now, there was something I noticed in this about stability. So let me just very quickly cut to a bit of recording that I did with something called stabilization turned on, or super stabilization. This appears to be an onboard stabilization mode. Now, one of the settings that I found in the menu is something called super stabilization. Now I don't know what that does, so I've just turned it on. Let's see what difference that makes. This is an alternative to using something like gyro flow, and hopefully it means that this is looking a little bit more smooth than it would normally. So let me pan around and we'll see what it actually looks like. So again, sorry for the audio on that. That is absolutely the audio from the camera. We're back on the microphone back at the desk. But you can see here the image itself is looking pretty good. There's nice saturation, there's nice detail in the shadows. The sky is a little blown out when we're in these particularly dark places. So what's it like with gyro flow? I know everyone's going to ask. Well, gyro flow works really well. I have been waiting also because there is going to be an official RunCam 2 lens profile. This is the one that I've been playing with here. The stabilization is working very well. I think I still need to play with the lens profile and make it a little bit better. But in terms of the use of gyro flow, it works really nicely. And once there is an official lens profile, it'll be super simple and easy to set up. But gyro flow itself is working very nicely with the camera. The quality and detail in the gyro data that the camera's recording is really good, and the synchronization is very simple and easy to set up. So this is one of those cameras, if you do want to play with gyro flow, is going to be a nice experience. So there is a lot to like in this little £100 camera. Things I'm particularly impressed of, the USB power does make it very versatile. I found myself just plugging it into a USB power bank for lots of things. You can also then use that USB port to plug it into your computer and use it like a thumb drive to get your files off. And also when it's connected to the computer, it does seem to want to use it as a webcam as well. So very versatile little camera. And I'm pleased that we can see the difference in the video quality. As you increase the resolution actually does increase. I know that sounds like an obvious thing, but so many cameras that I've tried here that are cheap and cheerful, although they claim to be 4K, it's just 4K upscaled from something else. The update process is nice and simple. Just stick the file on the SD card, power the camera and let it go through the process. And I would personally recommend, if you're going to get one of these, get the ND filter set. I personally think it provides a much nicer picture when you're using it. And there's also AV out from that USB connector with that additional wire, the yellow one, which means that if you wanted to plumb it into some kind of FPV transmitter or something like that, you could as well. Although I would expect there is significant latency doing it that way. And the onboard smoothing seems to work nicely with gyro flow, as with all the other cameras too. So lots of good stuff. Only a handful of things to warn you about really. LED at the front is nice and bright in a situation like this where I'm indoors. Outside in the sunlight, I have found it a little bit trickier to spot unless I'm looking at the camera straight on. Maximum recording of about 10 minutes in 4K due to heating, unless the unit is cooled. It's only getting very slightly warm at 1080p and a little bit warmer at 2.7K, but at 4K I would recommend that you're not having it somewhere that's really hot, because it's actually working very hard to capture that 4K image. 5 volt only, but it's also got USB 2. Don't try and power this from anything but a very, very clean 5 volt supply. It won't like it. And because it pulls a little bit more power than the previous versions, if you're swapping one for the other, then there's an additional 200 milliamps that this will draw, 700 versus the 500 of the previous version. Make sure that the power supply you're using can handle that easier. And of course, it is heavier and larger than the previous version, only by 11 grams and a little bit overall size. There are 3D printable mounts for it already. I got one in my box here, and I'm very tempted to put this on the front of one of my quads, and you'll probably see flying footage when I next get to the field. So in summary, this is actually a really good update to one of my favourite little cheap and cheerful cameras. I am not a fan of skeletonizing GoPros and putting them on the front of models to be smashed and crashed and destroy $300 to $400 every time I have a nasty tumble. More than happy to put this kind of money in jeopardy if I am flying. Or, because they're so small and easy to sight, put another camera pointing in another direction. This is also a great way to do it. However, I would potentially look at this as more of an action cam that has lots more versatility. This potentially could be used in lots of other things rather than just stuck on the nose of a quad or a plane. And part of that is the USB stuff, but also that there is actually a decent 4K image and it's gyro stabilizing as well. So maybe the front of a motorbike or the rear of a motorbike, or even using it as something like a dash cam, would be a good use of this kind of thing too. So TICV good, RunCam. Thanks for doing us a good update. Hopefully this now means that the previous versions will get a little bit cheaper too. Thank you for watching my video. Check out the playlist, and adding Pedantry 60 to your search terms will help you find my content. If you haven't done so already, please hit the like and subscribe button. It helps a lot. You can support the time I spend here answering questions and helping others by using the links in the video description.